Good morning, Year 9, and this is Week 3, Lesson 1. I'm just going to read through the slides. If you're working on paper, then it's the same information, it just may be slightly more differently laid out. The purpose of these videos isn't really for me to give you answers to the work. It's for me to read the work aloud to you so you can follow along, give you some extra ideas on how to answer questions, and then hopefully by the end of it, you'll feel a little bit more confident when it comes to answering the questions on your own. So let's have a look. Learning intentions. This week I will 1. Read the biography of Ali Cobby Eckermann. 2. Read articles about Ali Cobby Eckermann. And 3. Use previous skills to start analysing a poem. It is important for students to consider how First Nation Australians use their traditional art and storytelling to explore ideas that are shared among their own community. Now, these are at the beginning of every week's slides. That's just so you know what we're doing and why we're doing it. Just to tick a box when it comes to the end of the year, I can say, look, this is when we did this. Let's move on. Lesson 1. Themes and thematic statements. A thematic statement is a complete sentence or two that expresses a theme. A thematic statement could serve as a thesis in a thematic essay. Now, you guys had to write a thematic essay before when we were studying Romeo and Juliet, and so we've spoken about themes and thesis and thematic statements before. This is just a quick little reminder because it is something we'll be looking at again. A theme is not one word. That is a topic. So a topic is one word, such as love. The theme would be love conquers all. So some bad examples. The theme is not one word. The theme was love. That's not a theme. That's not a thematic statement. You're just telling me what the topic was. It is not a definition. For example, love is when you have feelings for someone. That's not a thematic statement. That's a definition. And finally, a theme is not specifically about one story or character, but it's universal, such as Greasers and Socks don't get along. So Greasers and Socks is from a book called The Outsiders, if you're lucky enough to be taught it in year 10. It's about two warring sides. It's actually a really good book. I taught it last year. So a theme isn't about one story. So if you're going to talk about Ali Cobby Eckermann, you couldn't say that the theme of her poetry is justice. Because we're not talking about her poetry when we're talking about thematic statements. We're talking about the one big universal idea that applies to everybody, and then we narrow it down to our examples are from her. So, some good examples down here. Unconditional love withstands any obstacle. That's a great thematic statement. Hope can help a person to survive any dark time. It is important to have courage to express your individuality. And jealousy can cause lasting damage to individuals and relationships. All of these are great thematic statements, and all of these could be used if we were going to write an essay about Ali Cobby Eckermann. And we would just say unconditional love withstands any obstacles, and then we would use examples from her poetry to support that statement. So let's have a look. Read the excerpt from Still I Rise by Maya Angelou, and then answer the following. So I'll read the poem first. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, and still, like dust, I rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. The poem's actually really beautiful. If you want to Google it, it's out there. But we're just looking at these three stanzas. So, what is the theme of the poem? Okay, remember we're talking about theme. So if we just go back one slide, themes are not one word. Okay, themes are universal truths. Identify two literary techniques, explain their effect, and create one thematic statement and write a paragraph based on why you think this theme is important. Okay, so if you've written up here what the theme is, you should be able to create a thematic statement from that and then write a paragraph based on it. A paragraph is only 4 to 5 sentences. All right, next up we have who is Ali Cobby Eckermann? Ali Cobby Eckermann, and I am really sorry I am going to butcher this pronunciation. I was taught it last year, but I've totally forgotten how to say it. So Ali Cobby Eckermann is a Yankunytjatjara slash Kokatha Kanga woman, born in Kuranaland in 1963. Before we start reading about her life, create a table in the book that has 3 columns. Label them family and background, Indigenous culture, and poetry and writing. Fill in the table with information from the slides. If you printed out the biography, you can assign each table a color code and keep track using that method. So if you don't want to write it down, what I would suggest you do is copy and paste all the information into a document and then print it, or you can keep it in that document and then just highlight it as you go through. I would make family and background pink, Indigenous culture purple, and writing and poetry blue. So 3 different highlighters, and then whenever something comes up that's about her family, I would highlight in that corresponding color. If you don't have highlighters or you don't like using color coding, that's fine. That's when you create your table and you will just have to handwrite the dot points that you think are appropriate for each one. This is going to be super, really, really, really important when it comes to later on when we're analyzing her poetry, and I'm going to ask you to draw on previous lessons to write essays. And this right here will give you very easy to see ideas about. So if I say, Ali Cobby Eckermann explores her dual citizenship in her poetry, okay, that covers all 3 bases. If I ask you, Ali Cobby Eckermann discusses her Indigenous culture, okay, why is her Indigenous culture important to her? We're going to talk about that in her biography. This isn't a complete biography. This is a biography that I've sort of Frankenstein monstered together from 3 or 4 different sources so that you get a really full but not too long biography to read, which I'm about to read to you guys. And yes, this is Ali Cobby Eckermann. This is what she looks like. So let's start. Ali Cobby Eckermann was born Penelope Ray Cobby at the Kate Cox Memorial Babies Home in Adelaide, traditional home of the Kurana people, in 1963. She was adopted as a baby by a Lutheran couple, Clary and Frida Eckermann. She grew up on a farm and did her schooling at Brinkworth Area School and Clare High School in mid-north South Australia. Eckermann, her mother, and her grandmother were all stolen, tricked, or adopted away from their birth families, becoming part of the stolen generations. Now, the word stolen generation may mean something to you now. Keep it in the back of your mind. Make sure you're filling out this as we go. And family and background, like stolen generation, she was adopted, all that stuff should be in this one. We are going to talk more about the stolen generations in future videos, so don't worry if you don't know what it is. After being taken from her mother, Eckermann was adopted into a family of white farmers in southern Australia. She says they were kind to her, but there were larger looming issues they could not shield her from. She was sexually assaulted by a family friend when she was young, and as an Aboriginal child growing up in a white community, she was bullied. By the time she was a teen, the alienation was unbearable. She spiraled into alcoholism and drug addiction. At 17, she left home with a man with whom she lived for 2 years, but she ultimately left due to his violence. She returned home only to discover that she was pregnant and gave birth to a baby boy when she was 19. A single mum, Eckermann felt judged by the people in her community. She gave her son up for adoption. Soon after, she left for Central Australia to find her birth family. There, she says she learned to honour her own grief and pain for for everything that had happened to her and to the woman who came before her. She began talking through things and writing about it. You have to honour it, and you have to feel it, and it hurts. And people will stop at a level of pain, and that's where they become stuck. And you have to feel every oasia of it to get to the other side. My poetry came out of honouring my grief. She started looking for a biological mother when she was 19, and Eckermann was able to reunite with her when she was 34 after her mother was located using the Australian government initiative bringing them home. She describes the meeting with a sweet sadness. So many of the stolen generations never even got that. But Eckermann and her mum missed out on an entire life together. In my mid-30s, I found my birth mother, Audrey, and 4 years later I found my only child, Johnny. The reunions with my Yankutjatjara Kokatha Aboriginal family were my happiest and best years. Meeting my family saved my life, she says. Her mother's death shortly after their meeting eventually led to her 2015 poetry book, Inside My Mother. My mother screams as I touch her hair, attempting to brush away the coarseness with my hands, to entwine twigs filled with leaves into her locks, a tiara of green to soften her face, and our tears dry now my mother is frailing. She talks only to those who have gone before, no longer seeing my love, no longer needing, it says. Most of her early adult life was spent in the Northern Territory, in Arrernte country, Jawolan country, and Larrakia country. She worked in various places, including remote art centre outside Alice Springs. Growing up in an environment devoid of Aboriginal friendship and influence was difficult. My journey to search for truth began when I was 17 years old, when I ran away to the desert regions of Central Australia. I worked as a cook, cleaner, camel catcher, and checkout chick at Yumundu before following more stable avenues of employment. I learned to live in two different ways over my life. I learned a good example of hard work and and kindness from growing up with my mum and dad in my adopted family. And I'm extremely grateful that my traditional family welcomed me back with such love and honesty. I got a second chance to live in an honest world. Today, Ali continues to spend time with her traditional family in the southern central desert regions of South Australia and Northern Territory to learn and to heal. She has also retained loving relationships with her adopted family, especially her adopted siblings and mum Frida. For her adoptive mother, the woman who raised her, Frida Eckermann, the poetry represents a different sorrow. It really is sad now to see Mum's concern that I identify as a stolen generation person, Ali Copy Ackerman said, because in her heart she wasn't stealing anything. She was offering a home to children that she was told weren't wanted. That's our common bond. It's that Mum, Frida, was tricked into believing something that wasn't true, and my own birth mother was tricked out of keeping her firstborn child, which was me. Eckermann's literary career was established in 2009 after she submitted her first collection of poetry to the manuscript competition run by Australian Poetry. It was published under the title Little Bit Long Time, first in pamphlet form by the Australian Poetry Centre and then in book form both in 2009. Its subject matter is a problematic history of Indigenous Australians since colonial times, which means that she explores both her own life and experience as an Indigenous woman, as well as looking at the historical perspective. She returns to this subject matter repeatedly in her work. Little Bit Long Time introduced Ali Copy Ackermann's work to the Australian audience and firmly established her as a strong and vital emotive voice within Australian Aboriginal literature, and one of the most remarkable poets to emerge in Australian poetry since the 1970s. Since then, she's published three more poetry collections, two verse novels, and a memoir. Her poetry has been translated and published in Croatia, Indonesia, Greek, and New Zealand. Her first verse novel, My Father's Eyes, will be launched in Sydney, March 2011. Ali has won several awards, including first prize in ATSI's Survival Poetry Competition in 2009, first prize Dimick's Red Earth Poetry Award Northern Territory in 2008, and was highly commended in the Marin Eldridge Award in 2009. She says that while she's honoured to receive the prize, it's also troubling. In Australia, we could be walking down the street and the cops will pull us over and search us and belittle us and frighten us. And there doesn't need to be anything we've done. It's just the fact that we're Aboriginal people. We're the oldest living cultural continuum in the world, and we're tired of living under the boot of Australia. When asked why she writes, Cobby Eckermann responded, I guess I write for both my families and for an ongoing healing that I need in my life. Mostly, though, for the Aboriginal audience. Is my biggest thrill is when they attend any forum to hear my words. I have been amazed at the reaction from the wider Australian and international audiences to my poetry, which encourages me to keep writing too. Poetry has also been a tool to assist my adopted family in understanding some of the change that has occurred deep within myself. I often say, poetry saves lives. Cobby Eckermann first started writing and publishing poems from an early age, but it was not until her mid-30s she began to write and publish regularly. She entered the Bachelor College of Indigenous Tertiary Education in Alice Springs in 2001 to study creative writing, which resulted in various performances and publications coinciding with a period of great change as she reconnected to her Aboriginal heritage. I love that classroom of Aboriginal writers. As it was the year I met my son again, he was 18. My life was changing rapidly. I'd only met my birth mother 4 years previous, and poetry was my lifeline. As were those handful of students and Aboriginal lecturer, poet, and author Ms. Terry Whitebeach. As my connection with family took me further and further into the desert and back to traditional Yakunjara roots, The poetry sang louder, and I began to discover who I was born to be. Miss Whitebeach zeroes in on the ludicity, intelligence, and compassion, the deft control of language that makes Ali Cobby Eckermann a successor to the late Dorothy Porter. These are the offerings of a writer who has journeyed with great determination through apparently irretrievable loss, through chaos, disintegration, and dissolution, who has harvested the gift of insight and emotional and spiritual intelligence and compassion, and who now reveals those insights to the eyes and ears of others through lucid images and punchy language. Poems such as Wildflowers and Kumana exhibit the same clarity and careful use of language, combining Aboriginal English, Jara, and Australian English to create unfamiliar and powerful effects from the demotic to everyday accents of Australian, so that the reader is forced to look more closely at what is familiar. Poems such as I Tell You True, Intervention Payback, and Grade 1 Primary use these same gifts to give voice to the brutal realities of Aboriginal experience and disposition experienced since colonisation and ongoing today. Cobby Eckermann's poetry is courageous in its ability to look at present and past brutalities directly and remain compassionate. Now, during this time, what you should have done is, let's go back here, either color code like I told you, or you've been filling out this. Because this is full of information about her past, who she is, where she came from, why she writes the things she writes, what inspires her, and what she's trying to do as an author. And all that's going to be really important when we start to look at her poetry. So while I was reading that, feel free to pause it whenever you need to. That's why it's a recording. It's really helpful. Okay, and by the end of it, you should have at least 5 or 6 dot points in every single column, probably even more if you're listening. Almost everything in here is useful. And that is the end of lesson 1. This is a painting done by Melanie Harvar. It's called Sooty Owl and the Chicks, for those people that were curious. And I will see all of you next video. Bye.